Greetings, pilgrims, and welcome to another episode of the Polygon Pilgrimage. And today I have something pretty fancy for you. We are here in the beginnings of what will be my final portfolio project. And as you can see here, I wanted to have these nice little display shelves. And I'm working on this for next time, doing a open close for the actual glass. As you can see here, the glass is complete on this guy. And today we are working with a inspection system. Now, there's a few tutorials on this out in the world already, but what I feel like I can offer you is a little bit better of an explanation, a little bit easier step by step, going through exactly what's happening and why, and I added a little bit to it. So the normal system allows you to pick up an object, it floats in front of our camera, we can rotate it around. I'll show that to you in just a second. My new system does that and also allows you to have per item a custom title and description for it. So let me show you here. So if I pick up this item, which might be familiar to some of you, go ahead and pick that guy up and I can rotate him around. I can inspect the item, and as you can see in the world around it, the reflections are properly propagated because this is a real object that is being really rotated in real time. So there's none of this, it's on a separate layer and all that jazz. So here is the famous Nintendo light gun. And you can see at the top here, we have the description at the bottom, the title at the top, and a full description on the bottom for the item. And then I press the button again and it goes back to its place. And here's a gun that I borrowed from an old project I used to work on. Hope those guys are doing well. And here is the gun. And I don't want to give too much away about it because it is their property, but at the top there is the title. And then check out their website there at the bottom. As you can see, totally separate object, same rotation. And we have the title and the description. And this guy over here is just for show at the moment, but just more of a display case. I wanted to kind of fill out the room a bit, but this is what we're going to be building today. So let's go ahead and get started with it. All right, so don't worry about the errors. That's a bug in UE that I've found so far. For the set rotation, you'll see here, it's always talking about set actor location and rotation. And I can't seem to get it to go away. It comes and then goes, so we're just not going to worry about it right now. So this effect comes in three parts. We have the changes that we make to the blueprint in the first person character. We have the inspectable object base class, and then we're going to make subclasses from that. That's what these objects are here, subclasses. And then we have the HUD itself, and the HUD is the text that appears. The HUD was the trickiest part, believe it or not. It's one of the simpler things, but it was the trickiest part. So let's go ahead and jump in. We're first going to look at the changes we need to make to, well, let's make our inspectable object first. So the inspectable object is very simple. It's a blueprint with, I did the scene and then I added a model component, and that's really all there is to it. I added this model component, and down here, this is the important part right here for you. So we need custom collision, and we want to set this to collision enabled, query and physics. It is a world dynamic, and what I want is I want it to block visibility, camera, world static, world dynamic. We're going to ignore pawn so that we don't hit ourselves twice, basically. And then the rest of this is fine all the way down the list here. Physics, body, vehicle, destructible, projectile. All of that is good. Then I don't believe there's anything else we need to do to this at all as far as the settings. Now, since this is a blueprint, we are going to add two variables over here. And these are going to be string variables. And obviously these are the item description and the item title. Now these set your default value. You must first compile, and then the default value will be available. And for just the base item I put, this is a default description, this is a default title. Very simple stuff. Okay, that's all we do for him. There's literally nothing else in the event graph, nothing else in the construction script. He's good to go. So let's jump over to the HUD. The HUD is simple to design, difficult to implement. So for the HUD, it's a very simple setup. I did start to play with this background blur. It sounds really good. The problem is it blurs my object and everything else behind it. So I'm looking in ways, if you have a way, let me know. I'm looking in ways to put this behind the object. So kind of in between the object and the world would be perfect. So for now, I just have them disabled. So this is just two text areas. The one says this is text, and this says description goes here. Very simple. These get overwritten by those variables. Okay, so that's all the easy stuff out of the way. Let's jump over to the quote-unquote hard stuff. So our first-person character. All of this here is what we're going to be doing. And then we're also going to edit the actual character movement just a little bit. We're going to add some branches in there, a little bit of a flag setup. Okay, so to begin with, We're doing a typical line trace. This is all over the internet, and I've done some tutorials on this. So very quickly, what we're doing here, a line trace by channel, we're doing visibility, first person camera, we're getting the world position and its rotation forward vector. And we're basically putting a distance between those. Mine's at 50,000, which is ridiculous. That's just my testing variable. So this is to get a line drawn out from our camera into the world, okay? And we're only gonna do this when, boop, 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 up here, the action input. So my input here for the interact that actually turned into inspection. So to inspect an object in the world, you're going to press the E key. So that's what I have set up, and that's in the project settings. If you go into your project settings, you can put that on there. Now we're going to do a flip-flop. So when we say A, true, the first time we click it, we hit something, we're going to do all this nonsense. B, when we don't want to do it, when we're done, we say, okay, I'm done with this object, let me move on. We're going to hit E again, and it's going to trigger this custom event called end inspection. Okay? So let's move along. So we're going to do a branch first, and we're going to say if the thing we hit is an inspection type object, then we're going to cast it to an inspectable object. This will allow us to get all kinds of information out of it. So we want to make sure that we cast to it once we have a confirmed hit of something that is of that type. All right? Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to set a couple of variables true. We're going to set a variable true, a Boolean called is inspecting. So this means we are in the inspecting state. This is important because this allows us to say, okay, we're no longer going to move. We're no longer going to do all the normal first-person camera stuff because we're taking a moment to inspect something. We're going to set our object's rotation based upon getting its rotation from here. And then we're going to set this variable, say, is player frozen true. So basically, is player frozen is true anytime is inspecting is true. All right. Then we're also going to get a location from our object, and we're going to set that as a variable as well. So now we have a couple of things set. We know what state we are in. We've stopped the player from moving. In a moment, you'll see how. And we have our object location and rotation. Perfect. So now we're going to set this timeline. And to create a timeline, you right-click and you can say add timeline. Oops, if I can spell. There you go, add timeline, okay? And I'm gonna double click him and go in and we'll see what this looks like. This is a float timeline and my values are 0 and 0.5. And I make sure to clamp my length to 0.5 and I selected both of these. And if I right click, I believe, I can set to auto, okay? And that's what allows me to have this nice curve. What this nice curve means, this is called a Bezier curve if you've seen it in other programs. This allows us to have a smooth transition from A to B and smooth transition back. And what that does for us is this will be our position and rotation. So you see the object smoothly kind of whoop, up in front of your face and then whoop, back to where it was, and it rotates at the same rate, okay? So let's go back to our graph. So that's gonna go, and we're gonna go in here and say, go ahead and do that now. And over here, we're gonna set our moved object. So after it's done here, we're gonna set where its position is, and we're gonna lerp it over time. So we're gonna lerp it to say go from A to B. All right, so this just gives us an update. Like looking at the clock, this gives you what second it is, and then this actually says, all right, now move the hand. All right, so we're gonna go from here and say set moved object as a float variable into here. And then our A, if you follow the A line here, is gonna come from our current position where we are when you click us. We're gonna go to B is where we wanna be, is our inspection location. And this inspection location is a variable we get from our first person character. So if we look at our viewport here, this is our inspection location. This is just a sphere collision that I added to the world, added it in front of the camera, and you can move this. You could even turn this into a variable to say for each different object, it has its own position because some things that are bigger might have to move further away from the camera to fully be seen in the scene. So that can be done. But for now, we just have it as a static spot for every object. So come back here, we say, where do we want it to go to? Where do we want it to come from? Okay, so from here, A, to here, B, and then our alpha is at what rate? And the rate is what we get from here. Makes sense? And we're also gonna do the same thing for our rotation. So this is position and this is rotation. So rotation here, A, you can see we follow this line, comes from the rotation that we got earlier. And B, our rotation, is gonna go to the active rotation here. All right, so we're just gonna go ahead and do that. And then the alpha here we're going to share from here. So we're going to get that same rate. So they're both going to move at the same rate. And then at the end, we're just going to say, go ahead and set your rotation and position. So let's jump back and let's take a look one more time, and I'll show you exactly what that does. So when I pick it up, here we go. All at once, we're in the inspecting mode. We freeze our transform. We set our original rotation location. We do a lerp, which is only going to last half a second, to the new ones. Whoop, there it is. Now, no matter what position or rotation I'm at, when I hit the button again, lerp back over the course of half a second. Okay, so let's go back. So that's all well and good, but what happens when I'm done and I want to put it back? How do I put it back? So that's where we make our custom event here. So custom event, you can just right click and say, add event. You can add a custom event, add custom event right there. And I called this end inspection. So basically think of this as like a warp point. You know, I can say, oh, at any point I'm doing whatever, okay, warp to this thing. So here's my warp. So when I hit the button again, it's going to go through a flip-flop and say, if this is the second or fourth or sixth, whatever even number of times that I've clicked this, we want to end the inspection. So we call this function. This function says, cool, no matter where I am, let me jump over to here and do this. And what we're doing here is we're saying we are no longer inspecting. So is inspecting is false. Is the player frozen? No, they're free to go. And we're going to clear the inspection object variable. We're just going to say, there's nothing in our queue anymore. You're clear to go. And then here we run the reverse. And this has all the same connections, and it will run reverse. So then we'll put our object back. Okay? That all seems easy enough. But now, how do we get our HUD, and how do we stop our player from moving and all that jazz? So up here, what I'm going to look at is how to do our movement, how to freeze our movement, and then we're going to look at actually rotating the object. Okay? So first, our movement. So I'm borrowing from the existing, and all I'm doing here is saying a branch. So if the player is frozen, then don't do anything. Don't allow us to move. If the player is frozen is false, meaning we haven't started inspecting or we have now ended inspecting, then go ahead and do the movement like normal. Cool. And what we're going to do here is get the first person camera, get the forward vector. There we go. All of this is borrowed right from the normal camera. I didn't touch any of that, okay? And down here, same thing. If the player is frozen, then we don't want to allow this movement on the other axis, on the right axis. If the player is frozen is not true, then go ahead and do what you would normally do. Didn't touch any of the rest of that, okay? Now to get things to rotate, that's a little bit more in depth, but it's not difficult really. So as you can see over here, I have a couple of functions, and two of these functions are rotation control yaw and rotation control roll. So these are up here, and we're going to look at each of those. They're actually quite simple. So this is a custom function, and to create that, when I'm on the normal event graph here, you just come over here and say start a function. Okay, call it what you will, and it will create a tab up here for you. So we can go in here and say, okay, so when I call this function, what do I want to do? Well, what I want to do is cast to my inspectable object, and I'm going to get the variable that I've set for that to say, okay, this is the one we're looking at. I'm honing in on what I want. Now, ultimately, what I want to do is set its rotation. Now, I do that by doing a couple of things. One, I need to get its current rotation, and two, I need to say, what axis am I really focused on? And I'm focused on the X or the roll. And for this, I'm going to use a make rotator. The only change here is I'm adding this in the middle, which is this is a float times float. Yes, float times float of -1, because I want the inverse. And you'll see why. I'll explain why in just a moment. So we're going to get the negative of roll. So we want negative roll when I call rot control roll. Okay? And then this combine rotators just says, let's combine the rotations here to get a solid rotation and throw it into our rotation. All right, so that's that. And then we look at yaw. Yaw is very much the same. And then just we're pointing into a different input, really. I literally copied and pasted these from one to the other. And there you go. So, and then again, we're doing the negative. And you'll see why, again, in just a moment. We're almost there. So with all that complete, what our mouse input here, the way we're changing this is, this used to point just directly to here. Add controller yaw input. And all we've done is say, here we go, if we are inspecting, then please go ahead and use our custom function instead of your own. If we are not inspecting, go ahead and use your own. This allows the player to still walk around the world and do all the things they need to do, shoot all the bad guys, all that good stuff. But if we are inspecting, we've frozen the player's movement, so the ability to move the camera back and forth and up and down and that kind of thing is counterproductive to looking at an object. So we're going to disallow that motion. Okay. Down here, same thing for the opposite. So we have the roll down here and with the yaw up here. Okay. Now, let me jump back into the example and I'll talk about why we have that -1 in there. So when I come in here and I look at my object, so I'm going to grab an object. When I move the mouse to the left, this is what's happening. When I move the mouse up, this is what's happening. Down, this is what's happening. Move to the right, this is what's happening. And to me, that makes sense. Left and right makes a lot of sense. Up and down seems to make sense. I might end up inversing those actually. What I really want to do, and I haven't figured out how to do this quite yet, is get a constant vector from the object to the camera. So now what I would want is from here, when I push up on the mouse, instead of this, what I really want is the whole gun to sort of roll away from me. Imagine an axis line going horizontally through the gun right now, based upon our perspective. I want the gun to roll so that I'm looking at the bottom of the grip now. You know, so that's what I ultimately want. But when I first created this, using all the tutorials that are out there, that is basically the same thing that I've showed you so far. All those tutorials, when I push the mouse to the left, this is what would happen, which makes no sense. So that's why I changed it to a negative, so now left does this. I feel like I'm moving this to the left in my hand. Like if I was holding a cup and I rotate my wrist to the left based upon my forward perspective, the cup turns like this. It doesn't turn like this. So that's why I changed that, so that's all that. Okay, so back to our object. So we're almost done. So now that we've done that and we've done our movement, we've done our mouse movement, I just completely disable the jump because I don't care about jumping for these examples. Now we need to make the stuff show up on the screen. And this was a little bit trickier. So here's how it works. On the event tick is called multiple times a second, 30 to 60 times a second. What we're going to do is we're going to say, are we inspecting? If we are, then we're going to go here and say, we have a variable here we have to come back to. I'll talk about it in a second, but it just does another check before we continue onward. And essentially what we're going to do is say at the beginning of the game, as soon as we hit play, we want to create a copy of our HUD widget. And we're going to get, it belongs to the player, we're going to create it. Now when we say event tick, say go, what we're going to do is we're going to look at what is the object that we're looking at. We're going to go reach back into it and get its description and title. And essentially we're getting the title text out of the HUD and setting the title text right there. And then we're getting the description out of the HUD and setting the description equal to the description and the title from the object. Makes perfect sense, right? And then we're going to do a slight delay, and I'm going to do this thing called add to viewport. That's what makes it pop up on the screen. And then here you see this viewport spawned is true. That means, hey, we've put it to the screen. And on the opposite, when we say the opposite of this, if this is not true, and we're all done, then we're going to go down here and say, you know what, then remove it from parent. We don't want to see it anymore, and the viewport spawned is false. The reason these are here is because if you don't have that kind of a chain of command, then when you go to create this a second, a third, a fourth, a 17th time, you get a whole bunch of warnings saying, it's already been created, stop putting the same thing on the screen. So what I did here was made a simple flag. That's a term for programming with a true false when you turn something on or off. So on the event tick, if we're inspecting, we want to show the HUD, but first we need to make sure that has the viewport been spawned. If it has, we don't want to spawn it again. We just want to set our variables. If it has not, then we go ahead and set our variables and spawn it. Otherwise, it's already there, so we don't want to do something twice. So I do want to cover this part in here just a little bit because this is the part that really got me. So down here, you'll notice when we cast back to our object here and said, okay, we clicked on something cool and it's a type of object that we can inspect. Awesome. We're going to pull off of here, and you see this says as inspectable object. We're going to pull off of here the item description and the title. We're going to reach in and get those variables out. Then up here, this is the part that really was tricky. So I had to go from my HUD, I had to get the HUD's text. Then I had to just set that, pardon me, set that as a variable. Just say it's a generic variable, it's a text. From there, I could say set that text equal to something else. And in this case, I want to set it equal to the title variable. And this title variable here, you can see this guy is a string, so that's why this in the middle is converting from a string to text. Okay, so this is the part that really kind of threw me for a loop. I had some crazy like text reference, you can see that there, yeah, all these type of things, and no matter what I connected, it just didn't work. And just a real quick lesson about persistence. This was about 3.5 days of figuring this out during my lunch breaks, and then the day I decided, you know what, I can't figure it out, I got to get the episode out coming up, and I really want to share this with you guys. I started making some screenshots of showing all this crazy wiring and saying, help me figure out, guys. I was going to post to the forums and everything. And the moment I sat down to actually take a screenshot showing, look, it doesn't connect, I actually got it to work. So it's just like that one more time of saying, like, I'm going to try it one more time, and then I got it to work. So I really want to encourage you guys, just keep trying because you'll get it. And now with all this connected, everything's all set and we're ready to go. So one more time, let's go ahead and look at our example. And I want to show you how you can create more than one of these. So the base object in the world will be this cylinder. And then what I did was to create additional ones, you right click on it and you say create child. And when you get that child, here's the zapper, for example. The zapper, woo! The zapper went all crazy. Look at that guy. Huh. Okay, zapper, you're supposed to be a blueprint. It's not letting me see the actual details of it. But anyway, so the zapper, when you create that child, you can swap out the model, and then I have obviously a material created for it. And over here, this is the important part. In the default area here, that's just what it calls it, you can name your categories. Here is the description and the title. So I should probably flip those somehow, but you can type a whole bunch of text in here, which is amazing. And then the title itself. So now when I go to hit play, I walk up to my zapper and say, tell me all about it. That's literally the Wikipedia page for the zapper. There you go, some actual information about it. So this is the kind of thing I'm looking for my my portfolio. It's going to be sort of like a museum. So I have all these objects, and when you can pick them up, it'll tell you what it is, and it'll tell you about it. And you can put it back down. You can walk around and look at everything, and you can pick up different objects. And I'm going to have a couple of objects on shelves like this, and some on freestanding pedestals. But yeah, I just wanted to share with you guys I wanted to give you something that is, people have done tutorials on this. Of course, there's plenty of them on the internet. And I'm going to still try to get that forward vector thing we talked about working. I know I needed to do something like this for my project, but I didn't just want to give you a rehash of what people have already done. So I wanted to explain it a bit better for you and give you something a little extra, which is the descriptions, custom descriptions for every object. It's quite nice, and we can just go ahead and pick up any object we want and have a custom description tailored to that object. So I hope that you guys have enjoyed very much. If you guys have any questions, if you know a way to do that forward vector thing, please let me know. I'm excited to learn. That's what this is all about. And I want to encourage you guys to keep practicing, get better, and I'll see you next time as the pilgrimage continues.